I took the job at the St. Jude's Crematorium because I needed the silence. After years of working construction, my joints were shot and my ears were ringing from the constant scream of saws and jackhammers. The dead, I figured, were quiet. They didn't complain, they didn't rush you, and they certainly didn't make any noise. I was wrong about that. The dead make plenty of noise, you just have to be lonely enough to hear it. St. Jude's isn't one of those modern, clinical places with white tiles and soft music. It's an old Victorian brick monolith on the edge of the industrial district. The walls are stained with a century of soot, and the air always carries a faint, greasy sweetness that sticks to the back of your throat. My job was the night shift, the clearing shift. I was responsible for the final burns of the day and cleaning out the retorts for the morning. The retorts, the ovens, are massive iron beasts. They look like the boilers of a steamship, ancient and hungry. My first few weeks were uneventful. I'd slide the cardboard caskets onto the rollers, push them into the heat, and wait. The sound of the gas jets was a constant, low roar that filled the vacuum of the basement. But then, the weight started to change. Every body leaves behind a specific amount of remains. You get used to the weight of the urns. But on the third Tuesday of my second month, I processed a small woman, barely 90 pounds in life. When I went to sweep the cooling chamber, the ash was too heavy. It felt like lead. And as I gathered it, I heard a metallic clink. I reached into the gray dust with my gloved hand and pulled out a small, brass key. It wasn't a medical implant or a piece of jewelry left behind by mistake. It was pristine, cold to the touch, and etched with a symbol I didn't recognize, a circle with a vertical line through it. I put it on my workbench and finished the shift. The next night, I found another, a man, 6'4", heavy-set. Inside his remains, among the charred fragments of bone, was a silver thimble. It was upright, sitting perfectly in the center of the tray as if someone had placed it there after the fire had died down. But the oven had been locked. I was the only one with the key. I started to feel a heavy, oppressive presence in the basement. It wasn't a ghost, I don't believe in those. It felt more like the building itself was watching me, leaning in closer every time I turned my back on the ovens. The silence I had craved now felt like a predatory thing, waiting for me to stop moving so it could swallow me whole. I began to have trouble sleeping. When I closed my eyes, I didn't see the faces of the dead. I saw the objects, the key, the thimble. I felt an irrational urge to see where they came from. One night, around 2 a.m., I decided to do something I was strictly forbidden from doing. I looked through the viewing port during the peak of the cremation. The heat was a physical force, even through the thick glass. Inside, the casket had already burned away. The body was a glowing, blackened shape amidst the swirling orange vortex. But it wasn't lying flat. The torso was arched, the head tilted back at an angle that no human neck should sustain. And then, I saw it. A small, dark shape was crawling out of the body's open mouth. It wasn't a bug or a rat. It looked like a tiny, withered hand, no bigger than a bird's claw. I backed away, tripping over a pile of empty urns. My heart was a frantic drum in my chest. I sat on the floor, gasping for air, telling myself it was a heat hallucination, a trick of the light and the shifting gases. But when the cycle ended and the chamber cooled, I found a third object. A small, porcelain doll's eye. It was blue, unblinking, and staring straight up at me from the ashes. I took the eye, the key, and the thimble and lined them up on my workbench. They looked like a collection of offerings. That was when the whispering started. It wasn't coming from the vents or the hallway. It was coming from the jars. The temporary containers, the plastic boxes we used to hold the ash before it was moved to permanent urns. We had a shelf of unclaimed remains, people with no family, no home. There were dozens of them, some sitting there for years. The sound was a dry, papery rustle, like thousands of dead moths beating their wings against glass. I walked over to the shelf, my hand trembling. I picked up a jar labeled Anonymous, 1994. The rustling inside grew violent. I shouldn't have opened it, I know that now, but the curiosity was a sickness. I unscrewed the lid, and instead of gray ash, a swarm of black, dried rose petals spilled out. They were dead, brittle, and covered in a fine, white powder that I knew was bone dust. Underneath the petals, at the bottom of the jar, was a photograph. It was a Polaroid of me. I was sitting at my workbench, my back to the camera, looking at the brass key I had found. The photo was dated Tuesday. Tuesday hadn't happened yet. I dropped the jar. The petals scattered across the floor like insects. I looked toward the retorts, and for the first time, I noticed that the roar of the gas jets had changed. It was no longer a mindless hum. It had a rhythm, a heavy, slow, rhythmic thudding that shook the very foundations of the building. Something was moving inside the ovens, something that hadn't been there when I started the shift. The vibration in the floor became so intense that the tools on my workbench began to dance. I slowly rotated my head. The doorway was empty, but the soot on the floor had been disturbed. There were no footprints, only a long, continuous drag mark, as if something heavy and soft had been pulled toward the furnaces. The mark led straight to retort number 4, the oldest unit in the building. It was supposed to be decommissioned, cold and dark, but the temperature gauge on its front was spinning wildly into the red. The smell changed then. The greasy sweetness was replaced by the scent of ozone and wet wool. I approached retort 4, my hand hovering over the iron handle. The roaring inside wasn't gas anymore. It sounded like 1,000 voices all trying to scream through a single, narrow pipe. I pulled the lever and swung the heavy door open. There was no fire inside. The chamber was filled with a thick, pulsating gray mist. It looked like ash, but it was alive, swirling in a slow vortex. In the center of the mist, suspended in the air, was a figure. It was made entirely of compressed bone fragments and charred teeth. It had no skin, only a cage of white ribs and a skull that seemed to be made of crushed porcelain. It was holding a small, silver needle, and it was methodically sewing pieces of gray shadow together. The creature turned its head toward me. Its eyes were the same blue porcelain doll eyes I had found in the ash earlier. It didn't speak, but the weight of its gaze felt like a physical blow to my chest. It reached into its own ribcage and pulled out another object, a small, tarnished silver locket. It held it out to me. I took the locket with a trembling hand. As soon as my skin touched the cold metal, a flood of images hit my brain. I saw the people I had cremated. I saw their secrets, the things they had hidden in their pockets, the things they had swallowed before death, the things they had died to protect. The key I found unlocked a diary hidden under floorboards 50 miles away. The thimble belonged to a woman who had sewn a map into the lining of her husband's coffin. The crematorium wasn't just burning bodies, it was harvesting. The building was a filter, stripping away the flesh to find the heavy things, the guilt, the secrets, the weight that people try to take to the grave. "The ash must be pure," a voice whispered. It didn't come from the creature, it came from the walls. "Only the heavy things remain. You are the collector. You have been chosen to sift the truth from the dust." I looked at my workbench. The key, the thimble, the doll's eye, they weren't gifts. They were anchors. And then I looked at my own hands. My skin was turning gray, a fine layer of ash starting to settle in the creases of my knuckles. I tried to rub it off, but it wouldn't move. It was becoming part of me. The figure in the furnace stepped out into the room. As its feet hit the floor, it made a heavy, metallic sound. It began to grow, absorbing the jars of unclaimed remains from the shelves. The plastic containers shattered, and the ash within flowed like water, wrapping around the bone creature until it was a towering mass of gray dust and white teeth. "Everything has a weight," the creature grated. Its voice was the sound of a grinding stone. "What is yours?" I realized then why I had taken the job. It wasn't because I wanted silence, it was because I had my own weight. A secret I had carried since I was a boy. I thought if I worked among the dead, I could burn it away. But the fire at St. Jude's doesn't destroy secrets, it reveals them. The creature reached for me, its long, ash-formed fingers brushing against my chest. I felt a sharp, searing pain. It wasn't fire, it was the feeling of my own heart being weighed. It pulled something out of my chest, a small, heavy lead slug. A bullet, one I had hidden in a box for 20 years, the one I had used to stop a man from screaming back in the city. The creature placed the bullet on the workbench next to the key and the thimble. "Now," it whispered, "you are light enough to burn." I looked toward retort 4. The mist was gone, replaced by a roaring, beautiful white flame. It didn't look hot. It looked clean. I walked toward it, my body feeling lighter than it ever had. I wasn't afraid. I was empty. The next morning, the day shift orderly arrived. He found the basement empty, no sign of the night shift worker. He checked the retorts, finding them all cold and clean, except for retort 4. Inside the cooling tray, he found a small pile of gray ash, perfectly measured. And in the center of the ash sat a single brass button from a construction jacket. He picked it up, turned it over in his hand, and placed it on the workbench. Then he sat down, picked up a broom, and waited for the first delivery of the day.